Greetings, everyone. Your cartoonist pal Stan here for a latest episode of 50 Years in the Dungeon, which is my little tour de force to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the game Dungeons and Dragons, which crazy is turning 50 this year. Uh, every show I wind up if you've watched before, I and my guests wind up talking about that, and every week I can't believe 50 years. Huh. And then I look up and I see how gray I am. I'm like, oh yeah, no, it's got to be 50 years. Anyway, we're here again for another episode where I will be chatting with a colleague of mine, and while I'm doing that, I will also be doing a cartoon homage. This time it's going to be to a product from the year 1988, 88, I think. You'll see in a minute what that is. But first, let me say thank you for tuning in. If you haven't yet, uh, I think it would be awesome if you would subscribe to the free newsletter for the show, 50 Years in the Dungeon.substack.com. Totally free. It'll let you know who the guests are each week. If you're a subscriber, you will be the first person to get access to the finished art that I work on. I work on it during the show. It's not finished when I tune off. I finish it over the next day or two. And you get it first. There are also options to be paying subscribers, and that gets you extra stuff, but I'm not going to talk about that. I'm talking about the free stuff, the free good stuff for you. 50 Years in the Dungeon.substack.com. Please. Also, while you're watching here, whatever platform you're on, I would take it as a kindness if you would click the like or the heart or the bell, whatever it is. It's not because I'm needy and it makes me feel better about myself because you like me. You really, really like me. Although it's true. All that is true. That's not why, though. It helps us get more people to watch the show. It helps promote the show. And it's very helpful to me. And I would love it if you'd do that. Please and thank you. So, Mike Selinker is watching. Hey, Mike Selinker, I know you too, which is pretty neat. My guest tonight is Matt Forbeck, who has been writing games and game supplemental products and fiction and all kinds of things for quite a long while. He's a super fun guy, and we're going to have a nice conversation with him. So that I don't say anything stupid or wrong, I'm going to bring him in here and let him say hi, introduce himself. Hey, Matt, how's it
So
going?
I get to do the stupid and wrong things.
That's
Okay,
right.
good. That's why I'm here.
Well, it would be wrong because whenever I introduce people, I make a mistake. I met him in 19 whatever.
Well,
Hey, Matt.
dinosaurs roam the earth. We don't remember. It's been a long time.
Hey, Matt.
Hey, Stan.
If people have not met you yet, what is it that you do?
I mostly make shit up for a living, right?
Fair enough. Fair enough.
um, let's see. I do a lot of stuff. I started tabletop role playing games many, many, many years ago. Ran a company called Pinnacle Entertainment Group, which I co-founded with Shane Hensley back in '96 or something like that. We did Deadlands, A Brave New World, a bunch of other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Wrote a bunch of stuff for second and third edition Dungeons and Dragons. Then I went back home and started working on freelancing. So nowadays I mostly write novels and comic books and video games. But the biggest thing for the last couple of years is the Marvel Multiverse role playing game, a tabletop role playing game being published directly by Marvel Comics.
Yeah.
So amongst all the other silly stuff that I do.
All right. That's pretty. That's pretty
That's a
good. And you
nutshell.
know
I
what?
could talk about for an hour or two,
Well,
whatever. It's a lot of stuff. So,
thankfully, we've got an hour or two.
oh hell, what do you know?
As
What a
it
coincidence!
turns out. Kevin Melka. Hello, Kevin Melka. Kevin says,
Hey,
howdy,
Kevin.
Stan and Matt. Um,
Kevin is working on something. We're going to run a game at GameholeCon for a Marvel game, actually. So we
yeah.
just submitted that. Kevin is doing all the heavy lifting, which is how he convinced me it was a great idea.
It's
So thank you, Kevin. Is what I'm saying. So
Matt, how is it that you got introduced to role playing? And the show is ostensibly mostly about D&D, and that's how most of
Sure.
us get introduced to it. And like you said, that is a big part of what you've done in your career. Was that the
Yeah.
first game that you played? Was D&D the first?
First hobby game, if you want to
Right,
call it
right,
that, right? Yeah, definitely Dungeons and Dragons. It was a friend of mine lived across the street. His younger brother was in my grade, and so we kind of were, we would look at each other across the street and say, "Who are those people?" And his mother picked up the D&D. It was the Holmes box set as a blue light special from Kmart and gave it to him for Christmas. And blue light special in Kmart are things that nobody under 20 years old understands anymore. But sure, maybe. Um, and it took us like 4 months to actually get the game together. We started that summer, and man, I was hooked instantly. We played every damn day, and the funny part was that we had the basic set, and then we would buy advanced D&D books to go with it, but didn't understand what the hell the difference was. And the
right.
advanced D&D stuff was much tougher, so we would play with the basic characters, the AD&D stuff. It gets slaughtered every day, and then
Which
every day we just roll up a new party and go at it again. Right.
which version of the basic set was it? Was it?
It was the Eric Holmes set, I think, which was it had a bluish cover, just a two-tone blue cover, came in a box. Um, but I think we didn't even have dice the first bit that we bought. It was when they ran out of dice, so we
You
actually
got
had
you
chips.
got the chits in the
Yeah,
box.
you had
Yeah.
to cut them up and then put them in a cup, and then you had to go down to the local store and say, "Hey, do you guys have these funky dice?"
Yeah.
And for us, it was a head shop in downtown Beloit, Wisconsin, right? So we got to work our way past all the dope paraphernalia and underground comics and say, reach over the counter at 13 years old and say, "Do you have any dice here?" And
For for those who don't remember, I know that everyone who's in the chat right now does remember. But for those watching who don't remember, there was a point early on in in the success of Dungeons and Dragons where TSR ran out of dice to put in the basic box. So what Matt's talking about is, and you know what? I tried to get Jim Ward to tell that story. Um, when he was on. I was very lucky to get him on
yeah,
just a few
that's so
weeks
cool.
before we lost him, and he didn't want to tell that story. That's one of my favorite stories because he was the guy in charge of buying dice when that happened.
There
Um,
you go. Yeah.
and
But that's a good problem. It's like, oh my God, we're selling so well, we ran out of dice.
right,
Holy shit. I mean, that's great, right?
I know. Well, so you know what? Here, I'm going to tell at least part of the story, and I can tell the long version because
Go
it's
for
your
it.
show, not. I mean, it's
No,
my
no,
show, but you're
no,
my
I want
guest.
to do it. Go for it.
So Jim was in charge of buying dice to fill to put in the basic set. So they were selling great. The sales were going up and up and up. And they knew that it took 3 months to get dice because they had to order from China. Um, and it took 3 months once they put an order in before it would show up. And so when it got to be 6 months out, and he saw where they were going to run out of dice, he went and said, I want to put an order in for the dice." And his boss told him no because TSR was working on developing the technology to make their own dice so they could save a bunch of money. And he said, "All right, but I need a 3 month window." And they started trying. And when Jim told this story, it was a 20-minute story, but it
I'm
talked
sure.
about how what was happening during the dice development, and it was harder than it looked. The dice weren't working out. So when it got to be 5 months out, he went to his boss again and said, "Hey, we're now only have 2 months before we're gonna, we're gonna, we need to order." He's like, "Forget about it." It gets down to 4 months. He says, "Look, I need to order, or even if I put the order in, we won't get them in time." And the boss said to him, "I said, Jim, I forbid you to ever bring this subject up again. We're going to print these dice, and if you bring this up again, I'm going to fire you." And Jim said, "Will you put that in writing, please?" And so he got his boss to write him a memo that said, "Jim is forbidden to bring up the dice. I've told him we're going to print the dice ourselves. He is never going to do it, and if he does, I'm going to fire him." And he says, "Here it is, Jim. So don't ever say it again because it's in writing. I'm going to fire you." And Jim said, okay. And then, as the long version of the story goes, he describes each month how the dice get a little better, but they still are looking like burnt pieces of popcorn. And it gets up to 1 month out, and they're about to run out of dice, and someone down in the warehouse says, "Well, where are the dice?" And Jim says, they look like this is burnt popcorn, and this is what we have. And they say, "How did you let this happen?" And meetings happen, and Jim gets called in on the carpet. "How could you let this happen? We're gonna have no dice if we put in an order now. We're not gonna have them for 3 months. Why would you do this? Why shouldn't we fire you?" And he holds up the memo. This guy ordered me not to talk about it. And look, it was 4 months ago I brought this up. So
For a
he
guy who
kept
started
this,
out as a school
and
teacher, he was a sharp dude.
but because of that, again, this now is for the people that don't know. Because of that, they had this 3 month period where they had no dice, and D&D was a super hot commodity. It was selling into bookstores nationwide, and so since they couldn't have dice, they created what Matt was describing: these little chits, these little cardboard chits, 1 to 4, 1 to 6, 1 to 8, and you cut them up and put them in little Dixie cups, and that was your randomizer. You reached into the cup and pulled out the number, and that's what you rolled on the die.
Which is a good lesson. Actually, I remember being stuck in a cabin with my kids at one point.
Yeah,
They're like, "Teach us how to play this game, Dad." I'm like, "I don't have any dice." I'm like, "Oh, well, I know how to solve that problem."
right. Oh, you know
We
what?
got the
We
piece
had
of
to.
paper,
We
right?
didn't have our 20-siders. There were only 1 to 0 twice. There was
Yep.
no 1 to 20 on it. We had to
Yep.
solve that.
And people forget the ten-siders didn't exist then
Right,
either. They in that first run because they weren't one of the platonic solids, right? They're basically just a cylinder
right.
that's chopped up with different pieces of it. So, which is how you can make lots of different funny-sided dice. But those original sets didn't have any ten-siders at all, right? It was like, oh, then Zaki came to come out with the 100-sided die, right? The Zaki
Zaki.
Hedron.
All right. So you started with the chits, and
Yes.
you learned how to. You guys figured out how to play the game.
Kind of, right? Because nobody ever did. Because if you tried to learn early D&D from just reading it out of a book and nobody knew had ever played it before, it was an interesting exercise. But we solved that by starting to go to conventions because I grew up in southern Wisconsin, a little town called Beloit, which happens to be about 45 miles from Lake Geneva. So, my first convention I ever went to was a winter fantasy that was held in uh, the American Legion Hall in Lake Geneva, which is actually where coincidentally we had Gary Con Zero. After Gary had passed away after his funeral, we all reconvened over at the American Legion Hall for
Mm,
a week, essentially, where we played games and talked about them, all the other history stuff. And you know, so I started out going to those kind of things. I had my own booth at Gen Con when I was 16 years old, selling a zine, which is what you would call it now. But it was, to me, it's like, oh, we're going to make a gaming magazine.
right.
We're going to call everybody around the country and figure out all this shit. But man, I figured out you couldn't make money doing that real quick. Um, but that got me involved with the guys at Pacesetter that were starting up too. That was Troy Denning and Steve Sullivan and Gally Sanchez and Andrea Hayday, et cetera, all these wonderful designers. And they kind of mentored me through that. And then I went off to college to University of Michigan, and Troy said, "Oh, you're going to Michigan? You should talk to Will Niebling. He's the biggest Michigan fan in the world, right?"
Right.
And Will had been the first vice president for TSR way back in the day, and he kind of took me under his wing. And our deal was that if I managed to find football tickets for him, he would buy all the football tickets for me and my girlfriend and
Right.
everybody else we were with. So he would take me off to different trade shows, working for Grenadier and Iron Crown and Mayfair and such. And I kind of wormed my way into working professionally on this stuff after that, which was, it's just really just the story of falling in with the wrong crowd, and uh, and then riding it as long as you can. You're like, oh, this is too much fun. This will have to end sometime. And here I am, 40 some years later, and I'm still doing it. So it's good fun. No complaints. This Gen Con coming up, I think, will be my 42nd or 43rd in a row. I got to
Wow.
figure that out.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Do you save your badges from the
No, I gave up on it a long time ago. I mean, they would be forever. Some people do it. I'm always like, wow, that's crazy. I would have one of those comic book long boxes full of badges at this point, right?
You know what? When I was in working in house, I could just hang it on my wall. I kept
Nice.
them all, and when I wound up getting laid off and came home, and I brought them in a box, and it was among the first things that I looked at. I'm like, why in the world am I keeping a box full of the old name badges?
Well, because they're memories, right? Every one of
Yeah,
those is a memory. When I started out, I kept the programs, I kept the badges, I actually have a copy of the player's handbook that's got signatures in it from like 1982, 83.
nice,
That's got like Gary and
sweet.
Tom Wam and Christ, one of the Hildebrandt brothers signed it, and Doug Niles. And the funny part is, I ended up being part of the Illiterates writers group with Doug here in Wisconsin many years later. One day I looked, I'm like, Doug, you signed this for me when I was 13. I'm a lot
Are
older than
you
that now, 20 years later. So
not to take this off this, but speaking of illiterates, I'm also an illiterate.
yes.
Do you get the email stuff that we send around each month?
No, I mean
All right,
the Midwestern illiterates kind of faded off, right? Most
right.
people moved out of the area. Ended up being me and Steve Sullivan mostly that were sticking around.
When we
And
finish when we finish here, remind me, and I'll make sure we
that'd
talk
be
about this
awesome.
the show
I would love to be
because
more in touch with all the
we
folks.
still get together online once a month.
Oh, that's cool. You see, like that's something I could do, right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I was a guest out in Seattle once. I came out for I was reading a Guild Wars novel or something like that, and Will McDermott brought me over to the meeting, I think, and I had a great time. Right? That's like Jesus Christ. I don't even want to talk about how many years ago now, but
That was a while ago.
it was
All
good
right,
fun.
so I'm gonna shift while our conversation goes on, but I'm gonna switch over here and start drawing while we.
This is why I'm jealous of artists, right? I was telling you before, I don't. I've been on dozens of podcasts, hundreds. Who knows anymore? But I don't listen to them too much because I can't do it while I'm working, right?
Right.
Because if you're writing, your verbal centers are already engaged, and somebody talking in your ear throws you off terribly, or throws me off
Oh, I
terribly.
know that.
But when you're drawing, you can get away with
Well, it
it.
depends. I was talking to someone about this in particular at lunch today. That
Yeah,
if I'm drawing this, I'm redoing what someone else did. If you wanted me to start and do a whole original piece while having a conversation, making sense and making it an interesting podcast, that wouldn't fly at all. So,
that makes sense because then you're more deeply engaged in your creative centers, right?
right,
Um,
right.
but yeah, here I know comic book artists who do this, but I figure what they do is they do the breakdowns ahead of time. They have the script done.
Yeah.
They've figured out
No,
the
I
storytelling
can
stuff.
I can do inks. I can this. I'm
Yep,
looking at someone else's layout and I'm just recreate. Well, I know it's not just, but it's not
yeah,
engaging that full uh, thinking part of the brain.
exactly. You're still doing better than I've ever done in my life, so more power to you. So,
All right.
I might be able to do this part where it's just stick figures, right? That'd be about it.
And it all starts with the stick figures.
Exactly. I
Um,
wrote, I made a couple of books about how to draw things, and I can't draw, right? For Complete Idiots Guides, I did Complete
yeah.
Idiots Guide to Drawing Superheroes and Villains, Complete Idiot's Guide to Drawing Manga Shoujo, which I don't even know much about, and manga fantasy creatures. And the artist was like, I don't know what you're talking about. I just draw these things. I'm like, well, that's not how art education books work. I've read a lot of these and failed at them, so let me help you.
I didn't know you'd done those. Who did you do those books for?
That was for IDW. They were doing Complete Idiots Guides way back in the day, really kind of before they started doing comic books even. IDW came out of the Special Projects Division of Wildstorm, which was Jim Lee's division of Image Comics, right?
Right.
And I had done, I co-designed the Wildstorms collectible card game for them back in the early '90s, and I kept in touch with all the IDW guys over the years, and ended up doing a lot of those Complete Idiots guides. In fact, I actually did a Complete Idiots guide to third edition at one point, and then after I had finished the manuscript, the license got pulled because Wizards decided they wanted to do their own,
They did.
not the
Yeah, they
Complete
did
Idiots guide, but the
D&D
Dummies
for
guide.
dummies. For dummies. Yeah,
Yeah,
they got a license with the for dummies. The the real dummies.
Exactly. Not the idiots, the dummies. So, so I think I probably still have that manuscript sitting around somewhere. I always thought maybe I should just release it under the OGL, but now it's 20 some years later and I'm too tired.
Well, I
So,
mean, it'd be interesting to look at it and see how much of it is still applicable and how much of it is rules centric.
yeah, exactly. Right. And a lot of it had been stuff that it hadn't gone through editorial at all either. So I'm like, well, I could put this out, but I'd probably want to take time to polish it then. And I've
Right.
got painting gigs that are I'd rather be working on
There's
that
always
I'll
that.
paint
Yeah.
on now instead. So that's just somewhere after I pass, my kids will find it on a dusty hard drive and go,
That
"What
could
the
be
hell was
your,
you
yeah. The
smoking?"
people can, that's how they'll pay for your funeral, is they'll
Yeah,
sell
hopefully
that
they'll just
manuscript.
auction off all the shit on my hard drives.
um, all right. So, how is it? So, when we now got Will Nealing introduced you. So, what did you
Right.
start doing professionally?
So Will introduced me to all these guys, and I would be basically what they would call a booth weasel, right? You'd hang out and
Right.
demo games for people and teach people about how to do different things. And you work the different sales shows, you work the different, so trade shows and the consumer shows. And then they take you out to dinner and drinks afterwards, and I'd always be like, "Hey guys, I could do a lot of this stuff for you. I'm just a college student. What the hell?" The first thing I ended up doing was I wrote the rules for the Myth Fortunes board game that Will and a guy named John Danovich, who also worked for TSR way back in the day, had designed. And it was based on Robert Lynn Asprin's funny fantasy novels, the Myth Fortunes novels, right?
Right.
Which I had always been a fan of when I was in high school and such. So I was like, oh, this is really cool. So John and Will had designed the game, but they didn't know how to write rules. And my only claim to being able to write rules is that I had sat through Mike Gray's How to Write Rules seminar at Gamma Trade Show at one point. And I was getting a creative writing degree, so I knew a little bit about this stuff and can handle it. And they just brought me in to write the rule book and make it clear and understandable, because I think a lot of people who don't design games don't realize that game design and rule book writing are actually two separate skills, right?
Right.
A lot of times, coming up with
A
mechanics
lot of
and
people in
strategy.
the industry don't understand that.
Exactly. And I've actually, like, Mattel has hired me in the past to write rules for games I've never designed or never even seen before, right? And often never seen since. Like one of
Right.
them was a Yu-Gi-Oh! Capsule Monsters game, which I'm not even sure was released in this country. Maybe it was, but I never got a copy of it. Somebody else had designed it. They just wanted somebody to come in, look at that, read it, read what they had come up with, and say, okay, how do I make people understand this, right?
Right.
And honestly, that's a gripe I have a lot of rule books nowadays. And I've been doing this for decades, and sometimes I sit down and read a rule book. I'm like, what the hell am I supposed to do? I don't quite get what's going on here. Clarity is always a big issue for that kind of stuff. So um, it's harder with role playing games because they're so damn big and unwieldy. But for if I'm playing a board game or card game, I want to know exactly what I'm doing and not screw it up entirely. But
Right.
you know, who the hell knows?
You do. You're
Ah,
the
let's
pro.
hope. Right? That's what they pay me for. So sometimes. Um, but mostly nowadays, I get paid to do design for games or writing for video games, or like I wrote a comic book for a VR game that it hasn't been announced yet, but when it comes out later this year, I'll be screaming it from the rooftops. So they hired me on to write a graphic novel as a promotional thing for a VR game. Um, and fortunately, VR people have lots of money to throw at people writing comic books. That's always a good thing too.
I want I, I want your contact list.
It's not bad, right? But yeah, we know a lot of the same people. The funny part is, like, I haven't had to look for work for a long time because people just say, "Hey, Matt, I hear you do this kind of thing. We'd like to work with you." I'm like, "Oh, well, sure. Why not? Your checks will clear, right?" And then we go on from there. Especially now that we have my son Marty working with us, so that means there's two of us working, which increases my bandwidth, but also
Right.
increases the hunger factor. Right? Like, these are more people that need to be fed. So.
Right.
Um,
So
yeah.
some of the earliest products that you were working on?
So I worked on that. And then, well, what I did that, I actually worked for New Infinities as an editor when I was in college,
Hmm.
as a freelance editor. Don Turnbull was the guy in charge of the company. That was Gary Gygax's second company after TSR. And he and Frank Menzer were heading it up, and they brought in Don as the CEO. And he hired me on after doing an editing test in which I remember he says, Well, I understand you know the difference between lesser and fewer, so that seems to be a good point in your favor. Okay, great.
Well, I, yeah.
Yeah, what the hell? Sure. And I actually found an unpublished Gary Gygax novel in my attic like 8 years ago. Um,
Wow.
like my kids were going through my stuff to find stuff to sell on eBay, right? Old crap I hadn't looked at for years. And they opened up a box that said Cyborg Commando on the front. They said, "What's this?" I'm like, "Oh, don't worry about it. It's nothing." They open up, it's like, "Oh, there's a book in here." I'm like, "Oh, wait, that might be something." So, um, I ended up giving it back to the widow, and now it's gone to the estate since then. But the estate has had some interesting twists and turns over the last year or so. So
So how is it that you wound up with it?
I was asked to edit it, right? And then the
Okay.
company folded. I'm like, well, I guess I'm not sending this back. It's just sitting here. I'll just throw it in a box and forget about it. I don't know how it survived all the different moves across the country with me,
Well,
but
could you put it in a protective box?
I put it in a Cyborg Commando box and nobody else wanted to steal. So it's, um, and it was, yeah, it just sat there forever. So it was funny. It was like, I think Shrike the Coming Avenger was what it was called. It was a new character for Gary that he had developed.
Weird.
Um, so I did that, and then when I got out of college, I wanted to go work. Uh, it was 1989, and there was a recession, and I had a creative writing degree, which meant there was bupkis for work for anybody. So um, my dad, as my graduation present, bought me a one-way ticket to England, which I wanted to go travel a little bit.
Right.
And I didn't know anybody in the hemisphere except one kid I had gone to high school with who was in Spain. But Spain didn't have, I couldn't afford to just go and travel. So, the ticket was my present, nothing else was. So with $600 in my pocket, I flew to London. And like I said, I knew this one kid in Spain that was the only person in the entire hemisphere I knew. And this is all back before the internet or cell phones or anything. And I called up Games Workshop like on a phone, like an animal,
Yeah.
and said, "Hey, I saw an ad in White Dwarf, 6 months ago. Are you guys still hiring for editors? Because I've done some game editing." And they told me to come in, and I interviewed with them, and they hired me. I found out years later I was competing against two other guys. I had no idea, and I suspect the fact I had done editing for Gary and for Don Turnbull probably tipped that in my favor. Um, and I ended up working for them for 6 months. I was a line developer for Deathwing and Gene Stealer, which were supplements for Blood for Space Hulk, which was one of
Baseball.
my
Yeah.
favorite games of all time. Right, and I felt really fortunate to be able to work with those guys, and that was amazing. So I got to work with Richard Hallowell, who was the designer of the game, and Bill King, William King, who wrote the fiction for it. And Bill and I became roommates and best friends, and we went to each other's weddings years later and stuff. Had a great time. After 6 months, they offered me a full time permanent position,
Huh.
and I had been making like nothing. Right, it was like £7,000 a year or something like that. But I was getting paid overtime to play games in the evening to play test games. So I was like doubling my paycheck by
That's
working,
all right.
80 hours
Getting
a week.
getting paid overtime to play games after
Yeah,
hours.
no, there are worse things. Again, you're like, oh, tell myself, my 13 or 14-year-old self, I'd be able to pull that off. I'd have been thrilled. So, um, but then my girlfriend at the time says, hey, I still got another couple of years of college and my grad degree I want to do and all this, and you're gone 6 months already. I don't know if we could do permanent or till I'm out of college. And I said, well, you're right. So I quit. I came back home, right,
Hmm.
and started freelancing. Turned out to be a good decision. That's my wife Anne, who I've been married to for 30, it'll be 32 years this year. Yeah, 32 years this year, and a mother of my five kids. So smart decision
Good
on my
call.
part.
You know what? I think you know what. If we're going to say one thing about your career, it's been cool. It's been full of good calls at the right time.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's probably true, although it's mostly luck. A lot of people are like, what? How do you do this? I'm like, you get lucky, really. You fall in with the right crowd, you make the right decision for reasons you don't possibly understand or the right reasons at the time. And um, if I was even luckier, I'd be a billionaire at this point. But
Right.
I'm content with the luck that I have. But that's part of it. I mean, there's a creative career. They're like people are like, oh, you just have to work hard. I'm like, no,
Mm,
there are a lot of really talented people who work their asses off and don't get anywhere.
yeah.
And you just have luck as well. Although if you're if you're independently wealthy or willing to learn live cheaply or have extra help, you get more shots at having luck,
Right.
right? So that's always one of the tricks. People are like, well, you're a privileged dude. I'm like, yeah, that gives me more shots at having luck. But you don't get to determine whether or not the luck comes along. It's just how many times at bat do you get, right? And do you strike out or do you get a base hit? Do you get a home run? I'm basically a utility player. I keep getting on base and driven home eventually. Um, so I did that, and then I went started freelancing. I started freelancing for Games Workshop. Did some Blood Bowl stuff for them, and then started hanging out with the wrong crowd at conventions. So I ended up hanging out with Shane Hensley, and then we started Pinnacle Entertainment Group together um, to publish Deadlands, and then eventually did my Brave New World game as well, which is this dystopian superhero game. Which also then I think part of the freelance stuff I've been doing is I did a collectible card game for Jim Lee over at Image Comics for the
Right.
Wildstorms collectible card game. I was a co-designer on. And then, Jim has gone on to become the chief creative officer for DC Comics, which is not a bad gig. I mean, he's also one of the greatest comic book artists of all time, which doesn't hurt, right?
It,
Um,
it
talk
doesn't.
about a guy with talent. Holy Christ. And then his vice president was a guy named John Nee, who went on to found Cryptozoic and become a VP at DC, and then was the publisher of Marvel Comics when the pandemic hit. And he had asked me if I wanted to be writing this Marvel role playing game. So, and because I kept up with Johnny, Nona had written a couple editions of the Marvel Encyclopedia and a Avengers Encyclopedia, and done bunches and bunches of other Marvel stuff over the years. They hired me to do that. So, it works out well. Again, if you manage to stick around long enough, people learn to trust you and respect your work and like you. And I mean, part of it's like, are you a jerk? Right? Nobody wants to work with a jerk.
Right.
Somebody causes them headaches constantly. I mean, or somebody who's constantly late and doesn't turn in work or turns in slipshod stuff. So all you really got to do is be, relatively competent and timely and kind, and you can build a career off that.
I think
Um,
one of the big things, and you just said it, so don't feel like I'm saying anything
oh,
super
oh,
smart. Is that when opportunities come, the most important thing is that you do what you say you're going to do.
yeah,
If you're reliable, more work gets handed out for reliability than for skill by
yeah,
a large factor.
that's true. I mean, although I'm less reliable now than I used to be. Before I had children, I was very reliable.
Right. Right.
And you could set your clock by me, and I would always hit every deadline and never missed anything. Now I always get things done, but sometimes I'm scrambling at it, right? Um, and I remember the first time I was ever late with something. I called up Rich Baker. I was working on a Forgotten Realms book to get back to D&D.
Yeah.
It was Unapproachable East, which ended up being featured in the D&D movie, the Wizards of Thay and such, right?
Mm.
And I was like, oh, this will be fun. Um, and I call up Rich. I'm like, Rich, I'm going to be late with this book. And he's like, why, man? You're never late. I'm like, well, I'm here in the hospital right now. My wife's on full bed rest. She's pregnant with quadruplets. And he's like, you
Done.
take all the time you need. God bless Rich. He's a good guy, but it's. And I got the book done. It just took me a little bit longer than you would have imagined before that. So,
I mean, the
um,
other thing is, I can tell you from having been a manager over there and other places, and being a freelancer, being a little late is that often that's baked into the schedule.
yeah,
What you can't afford is someone to say they're gonna deliver and then they deliver nothing. Right? If you call
right,
someone up and say, "Hey, my deadline's in 2 weeks and I'm gonna be a little late," they can totally deal with that. If you call them up the day it's due and tell them that, it's worse. But if you just don't ever drop anything, your phone will stop ringing. No, no,
yep, no, if you don't tell them until the day of, that sucks, but it's doable. Usually, you can say, well, hey, here's the problem, and here's when I can have it done. But you should try to tell them as early as possible. The worst ones are when somebody says, I'll have this done, and then you call them up a couple weeks ahead of time, and they don't answer their phone, right?
yeah,
Or you email them, and every way you try to contact them, they just hunker down, they turtle up, and refuse to answer anything. And then you're just sitting there panicking, going, "Oh my God, what the hell am I going to do when this doesn't
Right.
show up?" We've already solicited the book. That's one of the crazy things nowadays, man. I
Uh,
mean, the books, Christ, I see covers and titles for books I haven't started on, right? And it's just kind of frightening to look at that and go, "Oh shit, that the train has already left the station. I need to
right.
go catch it," right?
Well, I mean, you know, actually, this has come up a couple of times, but last week when I was talking with Jim Lauder, we were talking about the fact that because of the way things worked with TSR and their deal with Random House, very often you would get handed a book. It not only did it, was it going to be published, you knew what day it was going to be published. The release
Yep.
date was ready, and here's the cover. You've got to work this into your book somehow, right?
Yeah. Doesn't matter if it was a good idea or not. Doesn't matter if you wanted to write it or not.
That's it. I mean, you know what? I've only written two or three novels. I've done a bunch of short stories, but all the novels I've done came to me because someone else hadn't made it and
Yep.
already had a deadline and and a cover.
Yeah. And then you're like, well, this is the paint by numbers, the very thin paint by numbers I get to work up,
Well,
and I have to try to
often there
do it
was
what the hell this
more.
is supposed to be.
Yeah, for one of them it was very thin, but for the other, I had a lot of room to write what I wanted. It just had to be about this thing somehow, and
Right.
this character had to be in it.
That's not bad. That's tolerable, right?
Yeah,
It's when it shows up, you're like, well, we promised this on the back cover in the solicitation material, so that's what it has to be. I remember I wrote a book for second edition D&D called Sages and Specialists, right? Which somebody had
yeah,
come up with this idea for, which is basically, I think it was like 12 character classes that nobody in their right mind would ever play, right? Like a cartographer and an alchemist, not an alchemist, like a pharmacist almost, right? Um, and all these really ridiculous ones, like your armor or whatever. You're never going to play this, but they would be like sideline characters that you would get to know, and then you would build up your stuff next to them and keep going with them. Um, and I had to write 10 pages on each one of these things. And I don't know how the hell you come up with 10 pages on each one of these characters that nobody cares about, or these character classes that nobody cares about. And I let each one off with a bit of fiction that actually built into a story across all the 12 chapters. And it worked. I mean, it worked fine in the end. I mean, people were like, "Oh, I love that book." I'm like, "Man, oh, that was just such a pain to be given this little snippet of somebody's idea and then make it sing, right?" But I guess that's where you separate out people who can be creative on demand and or not, right? You just kind of make it happen. So I remember Keith Strom, who was with Third Edition at that point, working at
right.
Third Edition, came up to me at Gen Con and said, "Matt, let me promise you one thing. We will never do another book like Sages and Specialists again, and we will never force that upon you." Like, thank you, Keith. You're my friend. Let's go have drinks now. So
um, so how many different editions of D&D have you done products for?
I've done it at least for second and third edition. For fourth edition, I don't remember if I did anything official for that. I mean, I remember writing columns about it for different things. I remember, well, no, I don't know if I did. I've written a bunch of D&D novels over the years too.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote a trilogy for Eberron. I created the Knights of the Silver Dragon series which was the first chapter books for D&D. I wrote the first one of that, and the last two in this series are like 12 of them. And that was another one where it's like, hey, come up with an idea, keep pitching ideas until something lights a fire, and then you get to write the first one, and good luck. you know? um, yeah, it worked out. I had a great time with it, but holy crow. Um, and then I wrote Dungeonology, which was, I think that was like in the fifth, it might have been end of fourth, early fifth edition. But that was where, if you ever saw these ology books like Spyology and Dragonology and whatever,
Mm-hmm.
this guy had written a dozen of these best selling books. And then he decided to license out the ology term to a company in England. And they decided to not only license that, but also Dungeons and Dragons. So suddenly we had Dungeonology, which was written from the point of view of Volo going through the Forgotten Realms. And I got to do that. And that was a lot of fun, actually. I actually convinced Ed Greenwood to write a introductory letter that got slipped into it as a piece of paper he had to pull out of an actual envelope that was included in the book,
Nice.
uh,
Yeah,
as elements
those
for
books
introducing
were
his buddy Bolo. So that's
um, those books were a lot of art and a lot of they were high end, uh, full of tactile stuff, little
exactly. Yeah.
envelope things you could open, and
Yep.
here's a gem that you can touch and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this one had a big freaking pop-up map of the Forgotten Realms in it. Like you got to the center of the book, and you open it up, and it opened up to like twice the size of the book, or really four times the size of the book, and it was fun. I didn't have to do any of that kind of stuff, right? The paper engineering and such, that was all up to somebody else. I just had to make fancy words that went around everything. So,
Did they, when you did
um,
that, did they tell you what the fancy things they wanted to do with it were?
yeah, I mean, they're like, well, we think we can afford this, and we're going to put this in here, and you can write to this kind of thing. So, I had some general ideas, and if I came up with an idea, I'd say, could you guys work this into that? And they're like, oh yeah, we can do that, or like, no, that's way beyond our budget. Are you insane? Um, and so it was a lot of fun to work with them. Actually, it was a neat career, and they actually hired me on to write Endless Quest books too. After that, so I wrote six full color Endless Quest books that came out
Right.
several years ago now. But I had a ball working on those. You know, that was in the whole the series that Rose Estes developed way back in the day
Right.
for choose your own adventure books. Essentially, pick a path. Can't say choose your own adventure because it's a
No, that's
trademark. But
different. That's a copyrighted thing.
exactly. So we avoid that, but endless quest books, and those were a ton of fun. So I worked on a bunch of that.
I know,
Um,
you know what? It's weird for someone hosting the podcast to look off screen, but I know that if I dig around here, I have To Catch a Thief
hey, there we go.
by Matt Forbeck.
Very nice, very nice. I have to see if I have any copies of those. Michelle Nephew actually stopped by and had lunch with me on Monday from Atlas Games, and
Mm.
she mentioned that her son Jack was reading the books from the library. I'm like, library? I take all these books. So I gave her a whole set of them. Now I have
See,
to see if I actually have another set around here somewhere.
Bryce Whitaker says the Blue Book, Sages and Specialists. That's the one you're talking about, right?
That's the one, yeah. That whole series of blue splat books. I started out as an editor for D&D. Actually, the first thing I edited was Age of Heroes for second edition,
Yeah.
which was oh god, it was two women writers, wonderful ladies whose names are escaping me at the moment, who wrote that.
Is it
Um,
Medman?
no, it wasn't Smedman. Oh, hell was it? One of
Cat
them passed during COVID.
Cassie? Someone? Cassandra?
Nope.
No.
Somebody out there at Google figure it out for me. But they were wonderful. They did a great job of that, and I ended up working on some other books. I edited a Fat from the Gray Mouser adventure that Wes Nicholson had written, Uncle Wes,
Mm-hmm.
um, who also passed, in the last couple of years. That's because 50 years of D&D, people start getting older, is what happens. So,
Yeah.
um, Nikki Casada, is that right? Nikki Ray and Jackie Casada. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that was it.
That
They were,
was
they were
that's the
part.
Cassandra I was trying to think of was Nikki
There
Ray.
you go. Yeah, that's the reason I'm like Cassandra. That sounds right, but it's not
Yeah.
quite it. So, yeah. No, they did a great job with that, and then I ended up working on Chronomancer. I became a developer for Chronomancer for second edition, which was a book that actually came over from Mayfair Games. If you remember, Mayfair had done this line of stuff called Roll Aids back in the day, which were unlicensed D&D stuff way before there was an OGL. And basically, Darwin Bromley, who was the president of the company, had a law degree that he had never used, and he was eager to flex that a bit. So he's like, there's nothing in copyright law and trademark law that says we can't do this. We should just write our own generic D&D stuff and publish it and let them sue us, right? And of
And
course they
that's
did.
what happened.
TSR did. They showed up and they're like, "Yeah, we're suing you." And Darwin's like, "Great, actually, this is exactly what I wanted you to do." Um, but they got to the point where it was about to go to court, and then TSR offered them a bunch of money just to buy the whole damn line from them instead,
Yeah.
right? Because if they had lost, it opened it up to anybody else doing generic D&D books before TSR at the time was ready to do that kind of thing. So, which is
That
ironic because now everybody can. Right?
that was, I mean, that was always the secret, the thing that never got tested. But people were afraid to get lawsuits
Yep.
if they if they're not like Darwin and have their own law degrees sitting around. Darwin and Kenzer were the two companies
Yep.
that had
Yep.
owners who had law degrees and weren't afraid of a cease and desist letter. But
Exactly.
your average freelancer or a third party person working out of their garage is. But it was always in house, and anyone that ever worked with a corporate lawyer, there was always talks about the fact that you can't you can't copyright rules.
Right.
There are
Now,
things you
you could try to
can't,
patent them,
and
but I mean,
you
yeah,
can't trademark. Yeah, that's where the patent came in
yep,
for Magic and for a couple other games since.
exactly. No,
Uh,
so yeah, there was those two guys, and there was Pete Fenlon over at Iron Crown was also an attorney, right? Um, which is one of the reasons they never really, trembled at the thought of a lawyer calling them up either,
right.
except when they knew they were wrong. Then they're like, "Oh yeah, you're right. My attorney here is on staff says we screwed that up." So, um, but so Darwin was eager to take that on. He's like, "Oh yeah, this will be great. We're going to win this for sure, and then we'll break this whole thing open." So not Wizard, CSR bought the whole thing, and the first one of the books they had was Chronomancer. So they looked at it and said, "Okay, this is good, but it's not quite up to what we need it to be. It's not really fitting exactly with second edition rules." So they hired me on to be a developer for it, as opposed to just an editor. And that ended up being that was Lauren Coleman wrote that, who's now behind Catalyst Games, right? But that was the first published work that Lauren had ever had.
I didn't know that
So
Lauren was the person behind Catalyst.
yeah, now yeah, I think he was one of the founders of Catalyst way back then. Lauren and Randall Bills and that whole crew, right? Um, and they basically took the whole BattleTech and Shadowrun banners from FASA and been carrying those high ever since. So, yeah, I actually worked with Lauren many years later. I ended up editing a line of Age of Conan novels for Ace Books, right?
Yeah.
Because that's an odd thing because Fred Malmberg, who was the guy who had founded Target Games in Sweden that did Mutant Chronicles and Chronopia and Warzone and bunches of other stuff. I had done some work for him back in the early '90s, and he's a great friend of mine now. We've known each other for decades. Uh, but he had, where was I going with this?
I don't know.
Okay, wait a
Story.
minute. So Fred bought the rights to Conan. In fact, he bought the rights to the entire Robert E. Howard library, right? Everything that Robert E. Howard ever wrote,
Mm.
and they had licensed it to Ace Books, the big science fiction publisher, for a line of novels. And Lauren had been asked to write one of the trilogies, and the problem was that they had another editor that supposedly working. I was working with Ginger Buchanan at Tor, who's a legendary editor. She's retired now, but they needed somebody on Fred's side to get the books to her, and so they brought me in to crack the whip. And Lauren had unfortunately been in a car accident, so he was on these horrible painkillers. He was only able to work for like 2 or 3 hours a day before the pain took him over, or he was too fuzzy headed from the painkillers to keep going. So um, but I had to keep going and say, "How many words you got to name, Lauren?
Right.
Huh? How you doing?" And one of the other books was Stephen York was writing them. And I said, "Stephen, I just want you to turn in every week 5,000 words, right? Just so we know we're on track here."
Right.
And the first week he just flipped out and didn't turn anything in. I go, "What happened? You're good at this." He's like, Nobody gets to read my stuff before I'm done. I'm just destroyed by the fact you're going to read this." I'm like, "Oh man, I'm not even going to open this up. I don't know what you're
I
talking
just want to
about.
have it, right?
I just want to see that it's done." Right? So, and he's like, "Oh, that changes everything." And then he was like a clock after that. He was great. So, but it's just funny things. You end up doing these different things over the years where you meet people and you start working with them, and then they end up doing something different and call you up, right? So then Fred eventually they made a movie out of the Mutant Chronicles. I don't know if you remember that. That was for it was a B movie essentially, a low budget B movie,
It
but
was
it had like Tom
made for
Jane and
cable
Ron
TV
Perlman
movie,
and
basically.
yeah, but it was like one. I think probably the first. Well, it was after the original D&D movies. It was the first non D&D movie that came out based on a role playing game, and it was Ron Perlman and Tom Jane and Devin Aki and John Malkovich was in it. For Christ's sake, uh, they hired me to write the novelization for it, and I got to go see a rough cut of the film and take notes on it and toss in all the stuff from the role playing game that couldn't fit in the movie. And then I got to go to the Hollywood premiere with my wife and walk the red carpet and go to the
Nice.
after party, all that kind of crazy shit. It was fun, just wild times. Just
Let's see. Ravenlore, who's a regular visitor to the show,
okay.
said Chronomancer is one of my white whale books. I've yet to get my hands on a copy.
I probably got a copy sitting in the drawer here somewhere, although I don't know. At one point, my kids were all like, "How do I make money, Dad?" I'm like, "Well, I got all this stuff you can sell on eBay, so go for it." And some things brought in good money. I think you can get it on Drive Through RPG now or DM's Guild as a PDF at least, right? Um, but yeah, that was a fun book to work on. It's kind of head mind bending too, to wrap all your head around all the different mechanics for going back in time and how do you screw things up and how do you do this so it's not just a burden on everybody playing the games like, oh, we did this and now we have to do it all over again, yay. um,
everyone wants time travel until they try and do time travel.
yeah, exactly, right. Well, the trouble is, in role-playing games you like to be able to skip the boring parts, right? You don't have to do the parts over and over and over again, so you had to come up with ways for people to be able to continue to skip the boring parts. You don't say, "Oh, and now we're going to walk." Like, the Lord of the Rings, they don't figure that out. I mean, I'm a big fan of Tolkien, but the fact that a lot of the Lord of the Rings is just them walking, or and eating food, like you can just say they got it. It's okay. um,
That's sometimes the adventure is getting to the adventure.
yeah, that's true, right? And that's actually where you get to learn a lot about the characters. When I wrote this Guild Wars novel I mentioned before, and they had asked like six people to pitch, and they picked three of us, and I got to write the first one, but the brief was come up with a story, a rousing adventure story that will span the 250 years between Guild Wars 1 and Guild Wars 2, and delve into all the different characters and new cultures that we're allowing people to play. I'm like, you're out of your goddamn mind. How are you going to do that? Um, but what I did is I stole from the Canterbury Tales, right?
Right.
So I had it being a road adventure, a road movie essentially. But every time they would stop and have dinner for the night, over the campfire, one of the characters would step up and tell a story from their culture that would illuminate either what just happened or what was about to happen. And it worked out. It was actually it went really well. It sold boatloads of copies, and they were really happy with it. So, although Jeff Grubb ended up working on it with me, right? He was the lore master uh, at ArenaNet at the time. And the funny part is, I would be in the middle. Try not to write books for things that are not done, right? That's my best advice for you because, man, the headaches you get. Like, oh yeah, we realized that you had the characters going from this place to this place to this place, but we actually moved the middle place on the map, and it's actually over beyond the last place now. And I'm like, oh Jesus Christ, I don't know how. And eventually, Jeff had to just step in because he was in house and take over that part, uh, just to make sure that we weren't screwing things up for how things were eventually going to be in the book. But yeah, that was fun. It was like I got to work with a guy whose games I had played when I was a teenager, um, and write a novel with him. So there are worse results to come up with. So,
I had that was my introduction to Jeff Grubb too, and I just had lunch with him today.
there you
So
go. Yeah,
you know,
it's funny, like you started doing this stuff as a kid, and you're like, and now like I remember I was having drinks with Troy Denning at a Comic Con like 10 years ago. And we were writing Halo novels, I think, at the time, or maybe he was writing Star Wars and I was writing Halo. And we looked across each other. He goes, I still think of you as if you were 16. I'm like, God damn it, Troy! I'm 40 years old and I got 5 kids. It's,
not to me, you don't.
it's it's so it is funny though, just how you can cast your mind back in time to those moments when you first met people. Like the first Gen Con I was at, I actually met Will Niebling and Marty Stever, who ended up being the vice president of WizKids, um, because I played Dawn Patrol with Mike Carr in my first Sunday Gen Con ever, and came in second place while I was playing with those guys. And I still remember them from those days. It was just absolutely wild. And 40 some years later, like last year, I was walking down through Gen Con. I bumped into Marty on the street with Mike Carr, actually, and just sat there and bullshit with him and went to the bar with him after that. So, okay, we're adults now. We can get away with this. So.
You know what? I tell you one thing. Your stories have a lot of food and a lot of booze.
I did grow up in Wisconsin. That's all I'm saying. So it's a kind of a tradition around here. um, yeah, you grew up in Wisconsin. It's a hard drinking culture, right? Wisconsin drinks more brandy, for instance, than any other nation on the planet. Right? The state of Wisconsin drinks more brandy than any nation on the planet, which is kind of strange. But we have a reputation to uphold. So
and you do a good job of
Well, we do what we can.
it.
My kids don't drink at all, right? I grew up in this hard drinking culture, and I don't really do it at home. I do it at conventions and such because I'm like, well, home nobody's watching. I can stagger from the bar to my bed. It's okay. But at home, it's pretty much just coffee and soda and water. That's it. Um, although Saturday we're going to have a graduation party for the kids, so I assume I'm going to have a beer or three there. So
A couple isn't too bad.
that's okay.
You'll be fine.
It is. It is. Yeah, the
Um,
gaming industry has changed though, because I mean, I remember these guys taking me out to different dinners and clubs and stuff when I was like, too young to be going to them when I was 18 and 19 years old. And now it's all like, oh, we're going to do networking events and mentoring. I actually think it's much better, but it's a very different flavor. It's almost like
well, that's a lot
watching Mad
of
Men.
business culture. Forget about it being specific to games. Business
Yeah,
culture has changed a lot for the better
I
in
agree.
the past 40 plus years.
I agree. I mean, I had fun with it back then, but again, I'll admit, as a straight white dude, it was easy for me to have fun at it. And, it's
Right,
much better to have. Yeah, I think it's a much broader and more welcoming way to bring people in, and to not say you have to be able to drink hard and go party to be able to be a professional, right?
right.
So,
Um,
despite the fact I run the Diana Jones Award party at Gen Con every year, but yeah,
you
what the
know what?
hell?
Here, before I was about to start to segue out, but the Diana Jones award is something worth talking about here while we got you.
Yeah, no, it's a lot of fun. We started out as a group of people on a mailing list like 22, 23 years ago, I think now. 23 years ago.
So
And it
again,
was
let's
basically,
presume
oh,
a lot of people watching don't have never heard of it, though they've probably heard of it. Uh, just kind of mentioned. They don't know what is the Diana Jones Award.
it's the Diana Jones Award for Excellence in Gaming, which we give out to one thing every year, which we thought was the most excellent thing in gaming, in the very Bill and Ted nature of that, right?
Right,
We have no rules about what it could be. We just think that, like for instance, it's gone to things like Gen Con and Magic the Gathering and Irish Gaming Convention charity auctions, and also we don't really care. Whatever we thought was the coolest thing that whoever is part of our committee voted on and thought was the best thing that year. And then we have a party on the Wednesday night before Gen Con, right? The Gen Con Eve, after everybody goes and sets up their booths, and they've gone and had dinner and they're tired and they just want to relax. We say, come and have a beer with us and talk with all the people in the industry that you know, and then we'll interrupt things for about 20, 30 minutes to give out an award. It used to be much quicker, but now we actually have, speaking of things, how they've gotten better and how we try to expand things to bring more people in, we have something called the Emerging Designer Program,
right,
where we basically have people nominate people in the first 3 to 4 years of their design career, and then make them kind of our fellows. And we bring them out to Gen Con, put them up in a room, give them an honorarium, give them a booth to play their games in, to show around, and we introduce them to everybody at the party as well. We bring them up on stage and let them give a little speech and explain who they are and get people excited about them as creators, right? And we try to
okay,
focus on traditionally marginalized folks who have not had a whole lot of ways to enter into the industry, and try to widen the circles, so to speak, right?
right,
Make the table longer as opposed to keeping people out of it. So, and we got a couple of guys, Camden Wright and Aaron Trammell, have been running that for us for the last couple of years, and they've been doing a great job with it. And I think we're just about ready to announce this year's recipients. So I think
yeah,
maybe end of the week that'll go out, and we'll
awesome.
see how that goes. So, yeah,
Keep your eyes on the gaming news for what's coming up for
yeah,
the Diana Jones. I mean, one of the things I always liked about it, what you were just saying, that it's you know a lot of awards are very specific, best rules, best this. This is kind of more open. Sometimes it's been games and
yeah,
rules or supplements, but it's just that an award for something that happened in the gaming world that had an impact and is excellent. Kind of took everyone by storm. I know one of the early on. I don't remember whether it was the first one. One of the early on ones went to Wolf Bauer the uh, for getting patronage. Years
yeah.
before Patreon or
Yep,
Kickstarter or any of that, Wolfgang kind of found a way to create a business out of having from the old patronage, the old Roman patronage and
Yeah.
European patronage style.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you got it for crowdfunding or whatever. Can't
Yeah,
remember. He had a good name for it back in the day. Now, we forget these things. That's why we give out awards, so we can go back and look them up on Wikipedia or on our website now. But yeah, it was just fun to be able to do that. The funny part now is that it's actually because we started doing this emerging designer program, which actually costs money as opposed to just passing around a hat for drink tickets.
right.
We became a 501c3 last year, right? Or the year, yeah,
Oh,
last year.
really?
And then so now large corporations, whoever wants to, can give us money and have it as a tax write-off. So the bundle of holding gave us a boatload of money to run this stuff. And thank you, Alan Barney and Beth Fishy, who run that. They do a great job over there, and
Hmm.
I had actually helped Alan set it up back when the bundle of holding was just starting, um, just advising. Right, it was really his idea. He did all the work, but like for instance, he didn't have a PayPal account set up for the first few bundles, so I just ran it all through my PayPal account and gave him all the money. Um, just to help out, right? That's what you do for your friends. And
Right.
so, 20 years later, or 10 years after that, or whatever, he's like, hey, we actually give out money to charities. So as soon as you guys are a 501c, we can arrange to, we can recommend for people to choose you as a charity and for this emerging designer program you got. And so it's been really amazing. We ended up being able to go from bringing out one person to bringing out 4 people now every year.
Oh, nice.
Um, yeah, it's been fantastic, and they're just wonderful, great folks. Somebody's asking about the background of the award. Yeah, that's a funny story. Um, so the award actually used to be a trivia trophy that went back and forth between Games Workshop and TSR UK, and it was created when TSR UK got shut down, and the guys there burned a copy of the Indiana Jones role playing game, and then took what was left of it and encased it in a plexiglass pyramid and mounted on a wood base. And the only part of the logo of the game that was left of Indiana Jones said Diana Jones, right? So that's where the name of the award comes from. It somehow found its way into James Wallace's hands many years later. He said, I've got an award. I've got a trophy. I should make an award to go with it. And so he did. He ran it for many years. I helped him out. The first time he gave out the award happened to be I think it was my 33rd birthday, which happened to be my 20th Gen Con.
Hmm.
And White Wolf wasn't having a party that year for some reason, so I bought like 3 barrels of beer and 6 crates of pretzels to have a beer and pretzels party at Gen Con with my friends. And James said, "Can I give out the award at your party?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure." So I think I went to Peter Atkinson that year for obviously a lot of great reasons. Um, and then everybody's like, "This is great. We should do this every year." And I'm like, "Okay." I'm not paying for it every year, so who wants to chip in $100 each
Right.
time? And we would basically just use it to buy drink tickets and make sure the hall was reserved, and that was all we had to do for it for 20 years. Now it's a little bit more involved, but still a wonderful group of people that we got there. Some people have come and gone, and the new blood is always keeping me on my toes and making sure we're doing good stuff. But it's been kind of stunning. I'm like, oh, suddenly I'm the president of a charity. How the hell did that happen? Right?
It's amazing what success will take you to, things you
Uh,
never dreamed of.
no, it's very odd, right? But for me, it's doing something good for the gaming industry because at one point I remember like before fifth edition came out, like in the fourth edition years, I would look around Gen Con and go, man, it's just getting grayer here, right?
Right.
And if something doesn't happen, we're going to end up being like those railroad model folks who, it's just grandpa in the basement and that's his hobby. And the kids don't know anything about it. They just know grandpa does that in his basement. Um, if we don't get fresh blood in, and fortunately, fifth edition and also the board game revolution that happened around the same time have really brought in lots and lots of new different designers from all across the spectrum, and it's been just really wonderful to see that happen. I feel very lucky to be part of an industry that didn't die. So,
Right. No, I think that not enough time do we spend being what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of being honest about the fact that the the boom of third party publishing
yeah.
in starting just after the launch of third edition, and the lowering the bars where you didn't have to understand the the distribution system and you know I mean, let alone then the digital resolution, where you don't even have to understand printing, right? You can start by uh, um, doing it just in PDF. But if there hadn't already been a marketplace
Right.
for these smaller companies, it used to be, and back in the day when you and I started playing, the D&D being in a major bookstore was before that. I couldn't find D&D until they made a deal with was it
Random House,
Goldman
right?
at the time, one of the major book chains, and
Yeah.
all of the other hobby games. I was not a hobby gamer because I didn't have a local store. Not that I knew. I'm sure there was one because I grew up in the New York area, but I didn't know of one, so I never would have found this stuff.
Yeah.
And we've now gotten to the point, or it had gotten to the point where people were getting it by going to bookstores, and if you couldn't find your way into the bookstore, then no one would know that you were there. Well,
Yeah.
now it's much more open. And if you've got a good idea, the marketplace is around, and the barrier to getting in is much lower. And having someone from the establishment. I know it doesn't feel like it, but you and me, we're the establishment, or a chunk of it, who's
Yeah.
who wants to shine a spotlight on the new people and give a leg up for people that couldn't get in before. They just make room for the people that, not that they were kept out. It's just that they they couldn't. They weren't kept out. They just couldn't get in.
Yeah. How are they going to find a way, right?
Right.
I mean, Kickstarter is another element of that. Just crowdfunding in general. Going
Yeah.
back to Wolf starting out with that stuff. It used to be you had to basically mortgage your home or your parents' retirement fund or whatever the hell you get your hands on, and then design a book, get it ready, print it, figure out distribution, all that shit, and then a year or two or three later, you would actually figure out if you'd actually made any money at this,
Right.
right? And people, I think now that treat Kickstarter crowdfunding as a promotional tool. I understand why they're doing that, but man, I think the big power behind it is to know that to have something be able to live or die immediately, right?
Yeah.
I'd much rather put some prep work into a book or a game or whatever and realize that no, that was a dumb idea that nobody wants right away, right? As opposed to having to watch it die a slow death over months and months and years.
Right.
Um, it's that fail faster philosophy. We're like, okay, that was bad, but let's try another one, right? And it's not going to cost me my house. It's not going to make sure that I can't come home for Thanksgiving because nobody wants to look me in the eye anymore. Any of that kind of stuff, right? Uh, so I think it's just great to be able to have those options nowadays. And like I said, it also lowers the barrier of entry. So, ideas for games that you wouldn't think, like, man, this whole idea behind journaling role playing games, which I never probably would have tackled. We had solo role playing games when I was a kid, like,
Right.
Steve Jackson stuff from the UK. Um, but the idea that you're just going to sit down and write a book that somebody's basically running you through as a game and have that be as a keepsake afterwards, that's wild. I mean, that kind of stuff just wouldn't have existed 10 years ago, right?
Right.
Without crowdfunding, where you can put it up there and somebody can say, ooh, that's cool, right? And the audience might not be the same audience you get for like the Adventure Time role playing game, which just raised, nearly $1.5 million on Kickstarter. But, it's a fun, great art project that somebody's able to put out there and learn about what they're doing as a creative, as well as, hopefully open some more doors for people to play different types of things.
Right. I mean, that's always been the case. Whether you're TSR and a third party, or a third party and a small company, or an individual, the the amount it takes to do it is dropped. But then the smaller you are, this you can have a success for something that
Yeah.
would never be a success. Like we used to run into that all the time. I've been involved at TSR and Wizards on a couple of things which at West End, or as a small publisher, these would have been huge successes, but they were dismal failures for TSR or Wizards, because they require that kind of return. So they'll never do games like those. But
Yep.
you or I, or Green Ronin, or small company X, or brand new designer Y, can go out and do them and make a few $1,000 and say, hey, that's great. Let's make
Yep.
another.
Yeah, I made my rent this month. I can maybe go on vacation. It's a maybe hire some people to take care of my kids so I can do more of this stuff during the day. Whatever, it doesn't have to be I'm a billionaire now, right, or
Right.
whatever. It's something to keep you moving and going in the right direction. And honestly, I think the whole idea that you're going to be this knock it out of the park and be wealthy forever kind of thing. Again, it doesn't happen to most people. You're really, really lucky
Yeah.
for a lot of that stuff to happen. But if you can just get enough base hits to stay in the game,
Right. No,
that's enough for a lot of us.
if you can pay the rent and make a living, that's a career.
Now, I always thought of the way I do stuff is more of a punk attitude or a blue collar attitude. Even though I got a college degree, I mean, it's really about, are you willing to put in that kind of work that you would work at if you were working a blue
Right.
collar job or working at Walmart or whatever? You have to be able to want to put in 40 plus hours a week, probably more because you're a small business person, as opposed to thinking, oh, I'm an artiste and I get to relax on the beach and think about things, and let people come and harvest them off my brow as I go. But to just say I'm doing this for a living as opposed to, for me it's always like, well, I get to do this for a living, so I better take it seriously, or I have to go back to like driving pizza, which is the way I made a living in
Right.
college, um, which is probably the only skills I have other than writing nowadays. So it's
Well, thankfully, Uber's come along. You can do that.
yeah, exactly. So
Yay!
maybe
Then
do
you
that too.
better you better stick to games. All right, I'm
Yeah,
going to stop drawing now. We've gone a little bit over an hour. That's that pretty good start for an hour. I'm going to finish
yeah, it was
this
great.
over the next day or so, and like I say, if you subscribe to the newsletter, you'll see it first. But I'm going to take that off screen so we can, the conversation. Oh, I took. There he is. I lost him for a second. The conversation already kind of has naturally turned to my usual wrap up theme of where we've developed over 50 years. You and I were just talking about how there are levels to the industry that didn't exist before and wouldn't have if not for TSR and D&D.
Yeah,
Um, and you, I think, before we started, you pointedly said to me that it's not just the 50th anniversary of D&D; it's the 50th anniversary of role playing games, role playing as a hobby.
exactly. And I think that some people forget. I understand why we're all excited about, the big brand that we've all loved for decades, hitting its 50th anniversary, but it's also like the beginning of the entire art form, right? Not just as a designer, but as a player, right? We all start out as players. We don't start out as designers, never having touched these things because you would go, what the hell is that? Um, but I think so. We shouldn't just be celebrating 50 years of Dungeons and Dragons, but 50 years of this incredibly interactive and community-based art form where you're playing games with your friends, you're coming up with stories and riffing with your friends. It's a unique way of doing things that no other kind of game really manages to capture. Right now, the best video games, as much fun as they are, even Baldur's Gate 3, still isn't the same kind of thing as me sitting around a table
Right.
with a group of people. So yeah, I'm a big fan of that. I think that one of the things when I started doing novels and video games and everything else is I never really got out of doing role playing games or board games or whatever because it's just too much fun. Even when I wasn't doing it full time for a living, I would still be like, the Kickstarter stretch goal for like six of my friends, over the course of a year, and just keep my feet in it. I've not skipped a Gen Con since I started going back in 1985, just because this is, to me, going to Gen Con is like not only the big festival for fun, but also it's like a family reunion. I get to see all my pals that I've known and meet
It,
new people and just be part of it. And bring my kids now too. It's just best time of year. My kids think it's as good as Christmas, so I can't argue with that.
yeah, that's you know what Gen Con conventions have changed a lot in the times that we've been going. The purpose of why the average person is going there has changed, and the kind of business that gets done there has changed. But what hasn't changed is that it's a place to go and you make your family, your hobby family, your game family. And it's been harder and harder for me to find business reasons to go to Gen Con. And so I'm not as close as you are. I'm not within driving distance of
Yeah,
Seattle. So I don't go, and I've missed more than I've attended in the last 10 years. But every year, I definitely, just what you were saying, I know my friends are there, and there's not a Gen Con weekend that I don't sit around going, I wish it was in Indianapolis.
Yeah, well, you should come out. I know it's hard. It's hard to make the excuse. Like
Hard and it's expensive.
it is expensive, right? It's the one show I actually pay to go to. And I have a lot of help that way because I do stuff for Gen Con, so they help me out quite a bit with it. But like every other show, if anybody wants me to come out, they gotta, fly me out, put me up in a hotel room, give me a
Right.
badge, all that kind of stuff. I'm not, the most expensive date where I'm like, and plus here's my, my appearance fee, and I gotta have my retinue with me, and all this kind of my entourage. Um, but like, I'm going to be a guest of honor at Origins this year. It's the first time I've been
Nice,
back in 17
nice.
years, right? So,
I'd like to.
and
Yeah,
I love
I
Origins.
want to go back to Origins sometime soon too, for a lot of reasons. Uh, I've got there are a few things in Columbus I want to do.
Yeah.
I don't. You may not know this, but I'm of the Thurber family, of the James Thurber family. Uh,
Oh, I don't think I did know
no,
that.
well, because it's it's on my mom's side. So
There you go.
I really
Exactly.
want to go to Thurber House in in Columbus, and also they've
Good.
got this great comic book at the university. They've got a great comic book museum and library.
Yeah. I
Um,
definitely should make the voyage out, make a pilgrimage at some point, right?
yeah,
If you could do it during Origins, bonus, or
right.
at least, take one of the weekends there and do it.
So I need to
Um,
convince them to make me a guest of honor.
yeah, well, I'll lean on them for you when I get there. I mean, the last time I was there was a guest of honor, again, 17 years ago, right? And I'm like, well, because you start doing other stuff, you're like, well, I could maybe do this one, but I can't do like two or three of them just for grins, right? But fortunately, like I live within spitting distance of Gary Con and Gamehole Con, which are two
Yeah,
fantastic shows. So they put me up and treat me well too, and give me badges for me and my kids and all that. So
you know,
so I get to do a bunch of shows. Yeah.
it's not lost on me that one of the side uh, possibilities of doing this show, as we grow an audience, is that maybe I get back to the relevance. You know what? He's the host of that great show. We should have him as a guest.
I think they should either way. I mean, you're Stan, man. You've been at this forever, right? Artist, game designer, writer,
Right.
all this great shit. They should have
You
you
know
out
what?
either way.
This is also a good time to mention I am a guest of a show this month. The week, not this coming weekend, the following weekend. I'm going to be in Missoula, Montana, at MizCon
Oh, cool.
as a guest. So if
I
you're
heard good things
anywhere
about
in the
that.
Missoula area, come on out. It'll be a good time.
I have a legendary long story about Missoula, Montana, partially involved that has to be told over several beers in about 30 minutes. But
All right. Well, I'll get some beers and maybe we'll record an after hours version of the show.
yeah, that's a crazy, crazy. That's like one of those stories that comes out of Fiasco, and you're like, what the
Yeah.
hell just happened? So, yeah, but good.
Brian Bird has just popped in and said,
Hey,
Matt,
Brian,
Dan,
Dan.
Brian. Um, all right. So 50 years of you know what? While you were talking about that, I keep meaning to. I'm going to vamp out. I'm going to get in, but Matt said something interesting. You talk about
I'll stop. I'll
the
be boring from now
connection
on.
between. Yeah, stop saying interesting things. What are you doing? You're ruining my swing. Um, the D&D has it. It's weird because D&D is a specific thing, but it is also the closest thing we have to a generic for role playing game.
Yeah,
Because role playing game has been now, if you say that, people assume you're talking about a computer game, and
right.
tabletop role playing game doesn't half roll off the tongue. But people, whether or not they're actually playing Dungeons and Dragons, if you ask them what are they doing this weekend, they'll say, "I'm playing D&D." It's the easiest
Right.
way to say it.
It's nice
Uh,
shorthand.
yeah. Which I know that Hasbro doesn't like. The owner of the IP
Most
doesn't like that,
no,
and I don't think that it's in any danger of really becoming a generic.
no.
But just kind of to your point, I think that a lot of people, when they think about the 50th anniversary of D&D, really are understanding that we're celebrating the the anniversary of this great hobby.
Yeah. honestly, it's an art form. I didn't when I started. Like I often said, I was thought
It
myself
can
as like a
be.
blue collar designer,
That's
right? Whatever. I'm like, I'm just making things up for fun, right? I'm not. And it was Greg Stafford who got me. He would always talk about his art, right? I'm like, God damn it, you're right. I usually think about this in terms of I'm producing something. It's going to be fun. It's going to be entertaining. I'm producing
yeah.
entertainment, but entertainment is generally art. It's just commercialized art. So
I think there's that might be an interesting thing to pull three or four people into a show to talk about,
yeah,
because my basic take on it is it absolutely can be art. It doesn't have to be art,
no,
right? It's a game, it's a hobby, but yes, if you do it with intention, it
right.
very much is an art form.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even somebody sitting around a table telling stories to each other, that's art in its own way, right?
Yeah.
Especially if you take it seriously and you think about what you're doing with intent. So role playing is a step above that, I think, because there's design and intent being done by not just the players at the table, but the creators of the game who
Mm.
have given them those tools to work with, right? So it's a really interesting blend of
It's
commerce
actually,
and art.
yeah, say it like that. It's actually several art forms.
Yeah, exactly, blended together, right?
Yeah.
It's like I say, it's a unique thing in a lot of ways. There's just nothing really like it out there. I
Um,
hate sounding precious about shit, but I really do enjoy it. So
right. Yeah. No, they say I don't argue with the fact. My problem is that people who want to talk about being an art form and are precious about
yeah,
it, because that I think misses the point of of what most people, what most uh, um, I was going to say common, and that sounds awfully snooty.
I like
But what your
folk. It's fun.
average person
Folk
who
art,
comes
right?
to it for is
Yeah,
not the art. They
yeah,
come to it for the fun of it. That
yeah. The
doesn't stop it from
camaraderie.
being art.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Good
All
point,
right.
though.
So we're gonna wrap up here. I haven't popped up Forbeck.com in a while. That's where you go to find Matt and all of his stuff. Because you're on social media and all those various things, and
Everywhere. Yeah, I used to be heavy on Twitter, and now I'm like on Blue Sky and Mastodon and Threads and Instagram and whatever, Facebook and whatever else. Just Google. You guys got search engines out there. Use Bing if you want to. I don't care.
Forbeck.com is a good place to for all of your Matt Forbeck needs.
That's right. Yeah, ask your local AI, and they'll make up some crazy shit about me, and you'll have fun. So it's all right. It's okay. I make up crazy shit. I just get paid for it. So
It's you make up crazy shit that means it's true.
yeah, there you go.
So, is there anything else you want to point people's eyeballs towards?
Let's see. I'm going to be trying to release the Shotguns and Sorcery Fifth Edition this summer finally because I've been so bound up with the Marvel role playing game forever, which is great. I've been having a great time with it. Go check out the Marvel role playing game. Go to marvel.com/RPG. You can figure out all about that there. The main book came out last August. The Cataclysm of Kang came out in November, and the X-Men source book is coming out in August, just in time for Gen Con and Comic Con. So, and right now I'm writing the Spider Verse book, which I'm like, ooh, I love
Very
Spider Man.
exciting.
It's good fun.
All right, Matt, you hold on. I'm just going to do a little bit of an outro, and then you and I can say good show.
Sounds good.
But thank you very much for being here. I very much appreciate it. And
Oh, thanks for having me on. You're always. I would chat with you in a booth in the middle of nowhere, much less on a camera in front of people. So, it's good fun for me.
all right, well, we'll wait. Let's bring some other people in, and then we'll bring you back because you and I could talk for another hour easy.
Oh, I'm sure.
All right, be back in a sec. As I hit this button here, and poop, just me. Thank you to Matt Forbeck for being my guest this evening. It's a fun chat that I knew was going to go all over the place. Had an amazing career. Definitely go to Forbeck.com and check out his stuff. He threw a lot of names of products and things out there that people who follow him certainly know what he's talking about. People who are new to it, you want to know about shotguns and sorcery, among other things. So go and check him out. In the meanwhile, I am going to finish this drawing of the cover from Greyhawk Adventures, and when I do, I'm going to make it available for people who are subscribed to 50 Years in the Dungeon.substack.com. They'll get to see it straight away. It's a free newsletter. Like I say, there are paid options that get you extra things. And if you want extra things, go for it. But if all you want is to know who's coming up next and to see the art first and just to enjoy my little writings here and there, sign up there. Please do. Again, I'm going to ask everyone to please, if you haven't yet, give a like or a thumbs up or whatever the platform you're watching this on has. It helps to spread the word about the show. It also makes me feel good about myself, but that's secondary. It helps the dreaded algorithm know that you enjoy this show so much that you interact with it, and therefore other people might want to see it too. So, yeah. If you're watching it on replay, not only that, leave a chat in the message. Just say hi. Tell me you were there. Tell me what your favorite part of that conversation with Matt was, or if you've played any of his games. I seriously would be interested to know. So until next time, thank you very much for tuning in, and I will be back next week with another very special guest and more interesting stories about my 50 years in the dungeon. Good night, everyone.